The grand spectacle of Versailles stood still, its shimmering walls now shadows of forgotten glory. In a chamber that had once echoed with the footsteps of power, the Sun King, Louis XIV, lay withering away, his once mighty body reduced to a sickly form. The very air in his room was thick with the stench of decline, an unbearable reminder of the decay beneath the splendor of his reign. The man who had commanded nations now begged for mercy from a fate he could neither control nor escape. And as his final breath drew near, so too did the end of an era. Louis XIV, born on September 5, 1638, was destined for greatness. From an early age, he was molded not just as a king, but as a divine ruler, an embodiment of God's will. By the time he was crowned at just 5 years old, he became the figurehead of an unchallenged monarchy. With his golden attire and regal bearing, he captured the hearts of his subjects and foreign dignitaries alike. His every movement was watched, his every word weighed. As the Sun King, he shone brighter than any ruler before him, casting his brilliance over France and much of Europe. At the heart of Louis's reign was the grandiose Versailles, a palace that grew from the marshes, a testament to his absolute power and extravagant tastes. No longer content with ruling from Paris, he built Versailles as his personal throne, a glittering symbol of the Sun King's eternal grandeur. He crafted not only a kingdom, but a world where he was the sun around which all must revolve. The courtiers, the ministers, and even the fashion. The king's influence seeped into every corner of life. His authority was absolute, his will unquestioned. But this towering empire was destined to fall, one agonizing step at a time.
Yet, as the years wore on, the Sun King's brilliance began to dim. In the late 1680s, Louis XIV's once powerful frame started to falter, and the decline was slow but undeniable. No longer the picture of health, the king faced endless suffering from intestinal issues and painful festering leg ulcers. His breath grew foul, his movements sluggish, and the commanding presence he had once commanded began to shrink into a frail shadow. The once unstoppable ruler now spent his days in his private chambers, surrounded by doctors, servants, and courtiers who could do little more than watch his decline with hushed whispers. Louis's deteriorating health did little to quell his desire for power. His courtly ceremonies continued, even as his physical form betrayed him. His diet, heavy with rich meats, decadent desserts, and copious amounts of alcohol, only worsened his condition. His once majestic posture crumbled, and with it, so did his control over his own body. His left leg became a constant source of agony. Yet, even as his body turned against him, Louis clung to the trappings of royalty, trying to maintain the illusion of strength and authority. The Sun King refused to bow to nature, but nature had other plans. As the king's body fell into ruin, so too did his mind. The once shrewd monarch who had outwitted rivals and overseen the grandeur of Versailles now became a shell of his former self. Paranoia took root. Louis began to distrust even those closest to him. Fear of poison consumed him, and he insisted on watching every meal be prepared by only trusted servants. He shut himself off from the world, holding on to control with a desperation born of his own crumbling health. The king, once omnipotent, now feared the very things he had ruled over with such confidence. In his final weeks, Louis XIV was confined to his bed, a prisoner of his own deteriorating body. His leg, infected and blackened, refused to heal, and the stench of decay filled the air around him. Yet, even as his strength waned, he insisted on maintaining his royal duties. Courtiers still arrived at his bedside, kneeling before him as though he were the undying Sun King. But, in reality, they whispered among themselves, for they knew that the end was near. Louis's empire, once so vibrant, was now crumbling from within, and no amount of royal ritual could stop it. As the fever consumed him, Louis XIV became delirious, his once commanding voice reduced to barely audible whispers. He prayed fervently for his soul to be taken, calling out to the Virgin Mary in his final moments of lucidity. But the king's body had already begun to betray him in ways even his might couldn't prevent. His once perfect appearance was now a grotesque vision of suffering. His body swollen, his leg rotting away beneath layers of bandages. Yet, despite his agony, he still tried to keep control, still insisted that affairs of state continue. It was a kingdom held together by illusion. On September 1st, 1715, the inevitable happened. Louis XIV, the man who had ruled France for 72 years, took his final breath. The once mighty monarch, who had once been the face of European power, now lay lifeless in his bed, his body consumed by infection and decay. Versailles, the palace that had been the heart of his empire, now echoed with silence. His passing, though expected, was still a shock, an end to a reign that had seemed like it would last forever. The Sun King, whose light had once shone across Europe, had finally set, leaving nothing but darkness behind. The aftermath of Louis XIV's passing was equally dramatic. His body, swollen and disfigured, was put on display in the royal chambers, where courtiers and visitors could pay their respects. The smell of decay was so overpowering that even the most seasoned attendants could barely bear it. The king's body was embalmed with difficulty, his internal organs deteriorating as the surgeons worked. Despite their efforts, the task became more of an autopsy than an act of reverence. His legacy, once one of grandeur, now lay in ruins, a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of power and the inevitability of time. Louis XIV's funeral procession was a final, grand spectacle, but it was one tainted by the stench of decline. The streets of Versailles were lined with thousands of mourners, yet many turned away at the scent of decay. The once proud king, who had commanded the world with his very presence, was now nothing more than a withered form being carted through the streets. His passing marked not only the end of an era, but the beginning of the fall of his legacy. The Sun King, whose reign had seemed eternal, had finally been reduced to dust, a fading memory in history. Louis XIV's passing is a powerful reminder of the transient nature of power. A king who once held the world in his grasp, who shaped the fate of nations and built monuments that stood for centuries, could not escape the inevitable march of time. His body, once the epitome of royal grandeur, crumbled into decay, a stark contrast to the glory of his reign. His passing marks not only the end of an era, but the collapse of the very illusions he had crafted. Let this story serve as a cautionary tale. No matter how high you rise, the fall is always waiting. If you found this tale of power, vanity, and mortality gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories from history's greatest figures. Join us as we continue to uncover the dramatic stories behind the world's most iconic monarchs.